My husband brought his work wife on our anniversary trip to Hawaii. When I got upset, he said I was being insecure and that men need female friends. Now he's begging me not to sign the divorce papers. I was heading to the airport when my husband Jerry texted me. I have a surprise. Hope you'll like it. I raced past the crowd of people at the entrance and spotted him at the check-in counter. But he wasn't alone. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. We landed in Napa just as the fog was lifting, but the cold in my stomach hadn't thawed since the airport. Tiago didn't help. He spent the entire drive to the estate on his phone, texting Josie about critical deliverables, while I stared out the window at rows of grapevines that looked more like prison bars than a vacation. When we pulled up to the vintner's cottage, it was everything the brochure promised. Rustic stone walls, climbing ivy, and a view that cost more than my first car. But Tiago didn't let me linger on the view. He unlocked the door, dropped his bag in the master suite, and turned to me with that tight, practiced smile he used on clients he was about to disappoint. "Babe, slight change of plans," he said, blocking the doorway to the bedroom. "The Wi-Fi signal in here is significantly stronger, and since Josie and I have to run point on the merger prep all night, we need this space. The loft upstairs is actually really cozy. You'll love it." I stared at him. He was serious. He was putting his wife in the dusty, unheated loft on our anniversary so he could share the master suite with his 25-year-old assistant. "You're joking," I said, my voice flat. "Tiago, this is our anniversary. You booked this cottage for us." He sighed, the sound of a man burdened by an unreasonable woman. "Ashley, don't start. This is my career. This merger pays for your lifestyle. Do you want me to fail?" He didn't wait for an answer. He just gestured for me to take my bag upstairs. I climbed the narrow wooden steps, each creak sounding like a warning I was ignoring. The loft was barely a room. Just a mattress on the floor under a slanted ceiling and a window that wouldn't close properly. Dust motes danced in the single beam of light. I sat on the edge of the mattress and listened to the murmur of their voices downstairs. They weren't talking about mergers. Heard laughter, the clink of glass, the easy, intimate rhythm of two people who didn't need Wi-Fi to connect. An hour later, Tiago called up the stairs. "Hey, I booked you a spot at the reserve tasting in the main hall. You should go. Josie and I need to code for a few more hours." "Booked me?" I asked, coming to the railing. Singular. "Well, obviously I can't go. I'm working. Go enjoy the wine. Take notes for me." He turned back to his laptop before I could respond. I walked to the main hall alone. The tasting room was filled with couples holding hands, whispering over flights of Cabernet. The sommelier paused when he got to me. "Just one today?" he asked, his eyes flicking to the empty seat beside me. "Just one," I said. "My husband is working." I sat there, surrounded by the warmth of other people's love, feeling the cold seep into my bones. My phone buzzed on the table. It was Tiago. "Stop texting me asking when I'm coming. You're violating my professional boundaries." "It's suffocating." I hadn't texted him. Not once. He was preemptively attacking me, creating a narrative where I was the nagging wife so he could be the victimized professional. "I didn't text you," I typed back. "This attitude right here," he replied instantly. "This is why I can't focus. You're projecting your insecurities onto my career. Toxic. Josie and I are trying to save the quarter, and you're making it about you." I put the phone down, my hand shaking. Projecting. Toxic. Boundaries. He was using the language of therapy to gaslight me into silence. It was a tactic I knew well, but naming it didn't stop it from working. Felt small. Felt crazy. Maybe I was being unreasonable. Maybe this really was just work. I looked around the room and wondered why I didn't just stand up, walk out, and call a car to the airport. Why was I still sitting here, sipping wine that tasted like ash, waiting for a husband who had clearly already left me? It's strange how the mind builds a cage out of hope. 4 years, Tiago had been conditioning me, microdose by microdose. Every time I questioned him, he'd twist reality until I was the one apologizing. He'd call me paranoid until I stopped trusting my own eyes. He'd call me ungrateful until I stopped asking for basic respect. I was trapped in an invisible chain of learned helplessness. Like an elephant tethered by a thin rope it could easily break, I stayed because I had forgotten I was strong enough to leave. I stayed because the reality he constructed, where I was the problem and he was the prize, felt safer than the unknown terrors of being alone. I drank the rest of the wine not because I wanted it, but because it gave me something to do with my hands other than packing my bags. I woke up at 3 in the morning. The loft was freezing, and the silence of the estate felt heavy. But then I heard it. Splash. A giggle. The low rumble of Tiago's voice. It wasn't the work voice he used on Zoom. It was the voice he used to use on me years ago. I got out of bed, wrapping the thin quilt around my shoulders, and walked to the small window that overlooked the private terrace. The moon was bright enough to illuminate the steam rising from the jacuzzi. Tiago and Josie were in the water. They weren't working. There were no laptops, no spreadsheets. Just a bottle of vintage wine. A $2,000 bottle I recognized from the room service menu. Sitting on the edge. Josie was laughing, her head thrown back, her wet hair dark against her skin. Tiago was watching her with a look of pure, unadulterated adoration. He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. His hand lingering on her cheek. It was intimate. It was undeniable. It was a bullet to the chest. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just walked downstairs and opened the sliding glass door. The sound made them jump. Josie let out a little shriek and scrambled to the other side of the tub. Tiago turned slowly, annoyance flashing across his face before he smoothed it into a mask of weary patience. "Ashley," he said, sighing. "What are you doing awake? You're interrupting a brainstorming session." "Brainstorming?" I asked, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. "In a hot tub. With a bottle of Screaming Eagle." Tiago rolled his eyes at Josie, a conspiratorial look that said, "See what I have to deal with?" "We needed a change of environment to unlock some creative blocks," he said, as if explaining quantum physics to a toddler. "And yes, we opened a bottle. We're celebrating a breakthrough. You wouldn't understand the pressure we're under." He wasn't sorry. He wasn't even trying to hide it. He was annoyed that I was ruining his vibe. "You put me in a freezing loft so you could work," I said. "And now you're down here drinking wine that costs more than my monthly student loan payment." "You are spiraling," Tiago said, standing up in the water. He didn't even bother to cover himself. "This is exactly what I was talking about. You are so insecure you can't handle me having a successful partnership. It's exhausting, Ashley. Go back to bed. We'll talk about your behavior in the morning." He turned his back on me and said something low to Josie, who giggled nervously. That was the moment. A snap. The invisible chain that had held me for years didn't just break. It evaporated. I looked at him, this narcissist standing naked in a hot tub, judging me, and I didn't see my husband anymore. I saw a liability. I saw a bad investment. I saw a balance sheet that was deep in the red. I turned around and walked back inside. I didn't go to bed. I went to my bag and pulled out my laptop. I sat on the floor of the loft, the cold wood biting into my legs, and logged in. Not to my email but to the cloud. We shared a family plan for storage, something Tiago had set up years ago and probably forgotten about. He was sloppy with digital hygiene because he was arrogant. He thought he was smarter than everyone else, especially me. I found the folder labeled Napa Trip. It was auto-syncing photos from his phone. There were pictures of the vineyard, pictures of the wine, and dozens of pictures of Josie. Selfies of them in business class. A video of them toasting in the master suite while I was at the tasting. But I didn't stop there. I went to the financial tab. I logged into our joint credit card portal, but the charges weren't there. Then I remembered. The corporate card. Tiago had given me the login months ago to file an expense report. He was too lazy to do himself. He'd never changed the password. I logged in. The screen filled with transactions. The flight upgrades. The private car service. $450. The Vintner's Cottage booking. The $2,000 wine bottle charged just an hour ago. All of it. Every single cent was billed to the company card. Then I saw it. A folder in his Google Drive that I didn't recognize. It was labeled Project Phoenix. Clicked it open. It wasn't a merger. It wasn't a company initiative. It was a pitch deck. Pitch deck for a new company. Phoenix Solutions. I scrolled through the slides. The product looked familiar. The code snippets looked familiar. Then I saw the client list. It was a direct copy-paste of his current employer's entire CRM database. They weren't just cheating on me. They were stealing from the company. They were building a competitor using stolen intellectual property and funding their startup costs, including this trip, on the company dime. I sat back, the screen glowing in the dark loft. Tiago thought his power came from his title, his expense account, his ability to charm and bully. He built his entire identity on having the girl, having the suite, having the status. But he didn't realize that without the company's money, he was hollow. It's called the illusion of power of the empty wallet. A man who needs to spend someone else's money to feel big is a man who is already bankrupt. And I was about to call in the debt. I spent the next 4 hours downloading everything. Every receipt, every photo, every slide of the pitch deck, every time-stamped text message where they discussed poaching the top 3 engineers. I organized it all into a single pristine PDF file. I named it Audit of Unauthorized Expenditures and Intellectual Property Theft, Tiago and Josie. By the time the sun came up, I had showered and dressed in the only suit I'd brought. Ironic, since I was supposed to be on vacation. Packed my bag quietly. I walked past the master suite where they were finally sleeping, likely hungover and smug. I didn't wake them. I called a rideshare to the airport. I didn't block Tiago's number. I wanted him to be able to reach me. I wanted to hear the exact moment his world fell apart. Because I wasn't going home to cry. I was going to the office. Monday morning was the quarterly strategy meeting, and I had a presentation to make. I walked into the office building at 8:45 a.m. The receptionist smiled at me, surprised. "Ashley, I thought you were in Napa." "Cut the trip short," I said, breezing past the security gate with my spouse badge. Tiago forgot some important documents for the meeting. I went straight to the executive floor. The conference room was glass-walled, fishbowl style. I could see the entire C-suite sitting around the long mahogany table. The CEO, a man Tiago called a dinosaur behind his back, was at the head. Tiago and Josie were there too. They must have caught the first flight out, probably panicking when they woke up and found me gone. They looked fresh, pressed, and professional. Tiago was standing at the front, clicking through a slide deck about synergy and growth. Opened the door. The heavy glass swung silent and smooth. Tiago froze mid-sentence. Josie's head snapped up, her eyes widening in genuine terror. "Sorry to interrupt," I said, my voice carrying clearly in the acoustically perfect room. "Administrative error. Tiago seems to be presenting the wrong deck." I walked to the head of the table and placed the bound report in front of the CEO. It landed with a heavy thud. "What is this?" the CEO asked, frowning. Tiago laughed, a nervous, brittle sound. "Ashley, honey, we're in a meeting. We can talk about the vacation later." "It's not about the vacation, Tiago," I said, not looking at him. I looked at the CEO. "Sir, that is an audit of unauthorized expenditures totaling $18,500 charged to the corporate card over the last 3 days. It includes a private jacuzzi suite, vintage wine, and first-class travel for a non-employee." The room went deadly silent. The CEO opened the folder. The first page was the photo of them in the jacuzzi with the timestamps. He looked up at Tiago, his eyes cold. "But that's the small stuff," I continued. "If you turn to tab B, you'll find the metadata proving that the Project Phoenix startup deck, which Tiago and Josie have been building on company laptops, utilizes proprietary code stolen from your server. And tab C is the client list they plan to solicit starting next week." Tiago lunged for the folder, but the CFO blocked him. "Sit down, Tiago," the CFO barked. Josie started to cry, a high, thin sound. "I didn't know. He told me it was sanctioned. He told me he had permission." I pulled out my phone and read from a printed screenshot. Text from Josie to Tiago, dated last Tuesday. "Do you think the old dinosaur will notice if we clone the database before we quit? He barely knows how to open a PDF." I placed the screenshot on the table next to the report. "I think the dinosaur noticed," I said. The CEO stood up. He was shaking not with age but with rage. "Security," he said into the intercom. "Now." Tiago looked at me then. Really looked at me. The charm was gone. The arrogance was gone. He looked small. He looked like a man whose wallet had just been emptied. "Ashley, please," he whispered. "Don't do this." "I'm not doing anything," I said. "I'm just auditing the books. And you came up short." I walked out of the conference room just as 2 security guards marched in. I didn't stay to watch them get escorted out. I didn't need to see it. I knew exactly what it would look like. It would look like justice. I took the elevator down to the lobby and walked out into the sunshine. My phone buzzed. It was Tiago. "You ruined my life." I blocked the number. Then I called Rebecca, the divorce attorney I'd researched in the airport lounge. "Hi," I said. "I'm ready to file. And I have the asset list ready." The fallout was faster than I expected. By the time I got to my temporary apartment that evening, Tiago's company car had already been repossessed. The company sued both of them for fraud, breach of contract, and theft of trade secrets. Because of the fraud charges, Tiago's assets were frozen. He couldn't access his bank accounts. He couldn't pay the rent on our expensive apartment. He was effectively homeless and penniless within 48 hours. He tried to reach out through mutual friends, begging me to talk to the CEO to drop the divorce to give him money. I directed them all to Rebecca. She was a shark. She made sure he assumed all the marital debt, the credit cards he'd maxed out trying to maintain his image, the car lease he couldn't pay. Kept my 401k. Kept my savings. I walked away with a clean slate. 6 months later, I sat in my new apartment. It was small, a one-bedroom in a quiet neighborhood, but the light was beautiful. I made a cup of coffee and sat by the window. On the table in front of me were the final divorce papers. Picked up the pen. My hand didn't shake. People talk about divorce like it's a failure, like it's a tragedy. But as I looked at the signature line, I realized it wasn't a death. It was an amputation. When a limb is gangrenous, when it's poisoning the rest of the body, cutting it off isn't an act of violence. It's a life-saving medical procedure. Hurts. The recovery is brutal. You have to learn to walk differently, to balance differently. But you get to live. You get to survive. I signed my name. Ashley. Just Ashley. Not Tiago's wife. Not the victim. Not the forensic accountant who took down her husband. Just me. Whole. Healed. Free. I put the pen down and took a sip of coffee. Tasted perfect. If you've ever had to amputate a part of your life to save yourself, share this story. You never know who needs to see the light at the end of the tunnel today.